When people think back to World War II, some names come to mind more than others. Most of these names are the leaders such as German Fuhrer Adolf Hitler, US General Patton, and Prime Minister of Britain Winston Churchill. Yet, with this war being a major turning point in world history and stunningly intricate massive operation, there were many other key figures who have received much less recognition from the general public. From the woman who stayed home to take care of the family while their husbands were out fighting the war after being drafted, to the soldiers battling on the front lines. Their work wound up being dramatically transformative towards the direction of the war. If you were to dig into the more peripheral figures from the war, many who contributed to the intelligence operations would stand out. For example, to highlight only a few, Garbo, Alan Turing, and Witold Pilecki were elemental characters from the pages of history. Without them, the world could have easily become barely recognizable from what we know it to be today. In the world of spies, Juan Pujol Garcia has a very unique story. More commonly known by his alias, Garbo, he is arguably the most important spy of his time. He did not get his start as a low ranking field officer within the CIA or the MI6 and work his way up, nor was he a well connected insider that could grant the Allied powers with closely held information. Starting from nothing, he took the strong initiative to create his own path. His politics were deeply influenced during his time fighting in the Spanish Civil War, where he became an ardent opponent of big government authoritarianism. Coming out of this experience, he saw what the Nazis were doing and wanted to dedicate himself to stopping them by becoming a spy for the Allied powers. At first, his efforts were dismissed, being that he was viewed as just a simple, regular person with nothing of value to offer. Initially, he offered his services 3 times to the British Embassy in the home country of Spain, but he was rejected. Following this, he took a more risky approach by entering the German embassy in Spain. He explained to the Germans a fake backstory, along with falsified documents to verify his credentials, to convince them that he was working for Spain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Hoodwinked, this persuaded them, causing them to bring him on as a spy under the pseudonym Alaric. To see if he was the real deal, the embassy tasked him with a series of technical questions about the British military that he was ordered to report back on with answers. He buckled down into intensive research in a Portuguese library, which enabled him to depict elaborate fabricated narratives regarding things like British military technology and plans. He passed this on to the Germans and they took him at his word, even utilizing his intelligence to develop their own military strategies. They even believed him when he stated that he recruited many other spies in Britain, each with their own backstory, to assist him in his espionage. Eventually, Britain intercepted his messages and was confused by what they had discovered. These messages told Germany that Britain was sending a fleet of ships from Liverpool to resupply the Allies in Malta, a small island country just south of Italy. As Britain knew, this was nothing short of incorrect information. Yet Germany sent out a fleet to seek and wipe out the British ships. Seeing this as a security risk, and how much pull this mysterious figure had over the Nazis, they wanted to unveil their identity. Britain soon after learned their true identity and brought him in as one of their own, as a double agent codenamed Garbo. Their unearthing of who he was came approximately 1 year after his proposal to their embassy to work as a spy. Further, it was this interaction that led them to suspect that he may be the German informant. Much of the intelligence Garbo provided to the Nazis was fake, so it was believed that it could only be a matter of time before the Nazis stopped having as much trust in him. To further improve his credibility, Britain gave Garbo the duty of supplying the Nazis with true military plans. He disclosed details, such as the location and time of the upcoming Operation Torch, which was going to be an invasion on the Nazi occupied North African coast. These details were sent in a letter through the mail, but were postmarked with an inaccurate earlier date, leading the Nazis to believe that it was sent a week prior to when it actually was. The letter was received shortly after the attack took place, which, as expected, resulted in the Nazis determining that Garbo's information was top level intelligence, but unable to be acted on due to the inherent faults of the mail delivery network. Garbo's close relationship was later relied on for one of the most pivotal missions in World War II, Operation Fortitude, which sought to deceive the Nazis about the Allies' D Day plans. During this time, The Nazis occupied France and heavily secured the coastline facing Britain. Planning to attack France, Garbo was instructed to mislead Germany of their actual intentions. Garbo relayed to Germany that the Allies were to attack France's nearest point to Britain, Pas-de-Calais, from Dover, so they would be distracted and move their resources away from where the real attack would take place, Normandy. To further deceive Germany, the Ghost Army of Fusag was established. The Allies created a military group of 150,000 soldiers to be stationed near Dover that only existed on paper. To underscore the significance of this newly developed group, they positioned U.S. General Patton to head this group, since he was viewed as a force of power that was to be feared. Fake military equipment that was only inflatables, like you would see at a Thanksgiving Day parade, were assembled to give the appearance that this operation was going to be executed. An entire large decoy fleet of equipment, such as tank and amphibious vessels, were created, along with artificially created signs of military activity, such as fake tank tire tracks. The Nazis took the bait, resulting in their defeat, which greatly turned the tides of the war. Garbo was the only person to have been granted military awards from both the Allies and Axis powers. Coincidentally, he did not traditionally qualify for either. Britain awarded him with a member of the Order of the British Empire, despite this being an honor only presented to British citizens. Authorized by Hitler, the Nazis awarded him with their Iron Cross, which was typically reserved for their frontline soldiers. Alan Turing was a mathematician and early pioneer of computer science. He is often considered the father of modern computers. But what he is most famous for is being the man who learned how to break the Nazis' coded messages that allow Britain and their allied counterparts to secretly spy on their communications. The Nazis were very secretive in many areas, one of these areas being their communications, in order to avoid their adversaries from discovering their plans. To transmit messages, the Nazis utilized an Enigma machine, which encrypted their messages into code. Enigma machines were developed by Arthur Scherbius. During his life, his invention did not receive popular use, despite selling several to the German military in the mid 1920s. It was not until about a decade after his death that the Germans widely used these machines, once the Nazis employed them during World War II. To use the machine, a writer would type their message on a typewriter. Each letter was passed through a series of wires and rotors that would rotate after each letter. Their number of rotations were dependent on the alterable settings that were built into the machine. For example, for every letter, the first rotor would be set up to spin one position. The second rotor would not spin a position until after three rotations of the first, and the third rotor would spin after two rotations of the second rotor. Every position represented a new letter. If an A was typed, it would be processed through the settings and end up being expressed as a Q on the final encryption. After a letter was fully cryptographically concealed, it was sent via Morse code to a recipient who was provided the settings for how to decipher it. With a seemingly infinite number of possibilities per what each letter input could be, it was arguably impossible to deduce the Nazi settings. Luckily for Britain, they had an Enigma machine themselves, so if they discovered the settings, they would be able to work backwards once they intercepted the radio transmissions. If Britain was given this information from an inside source, that would make it easier for them since it would not require them to figure anything out. They would simply just have to copy the settings and decipher the messages just like the intended German recipient. Yet, even if they had this opportunity, it would be a difficult relationship to maintain, being that the settings changed every day. To unravel the Nazis' radio messages from these machines, Turing headed a team within the headquarters of British intelligence, which was stationed in a Victorian country home called Bletchley Park. As Britain quickly discovered, figuring out this puzzle was done far too slowly when done manually. Therefore, in 1941, Turing developed a piece of early computing technology to automate this process called the bomb. Weighing about 2,000 pounds and standing over 6 feet tall by 7 feet wide, the bomb leveraged technology to eventually uncover what the Nazis were saying. Britain produced over 200 of these machines and trained many from the Women's Royal Naval Service, often shortened to WRENS, to specialize in operating them. After much problem solving, the bomb led to a breakthrough in cracking the Nazi code. Britain was ecstatic by their new-found progress and used it to make remarkable advancement against Germany. For instance, they could now map the locations of Nazi U-boat submarines, who were seeking British submarines to destroy them in order to block them from resupplying their forces. By knowing their locations, they could slip by them while evading detection. Following the end of the war, Turing sadly was not treated with the respect that he deserved as one of the most essential figures who helped lock in the Allies' victory. While reporting a home break in, he revealed to the police that he was involved in a homosexual relationship, which was illegal at the time. Consequently, he was charged with gross indecency and sentenced to chemical castration. A few years later, he died from cyanide poisoning, which may have come as the result of a suicide. Auschwitz is widely understood to have been one of the worst places in all of human history. Starting as a concentration camp before becoming a death camp, its reputation was startling and drew only the darkest of imagery. Finding yourself within its walls meant that you were forced to encounter some of the largest evils to ever be spawned into life. It was a place that nobody would dare voluntarily go to as a prisoner. This was until Witold Pilecki did so, which would make him the only known person to do this. Pilecki was a member of the Polish military who was granted several military awards from his actions during his time serving during World War I, as well as the Polish-Soviet War. But this was only where his story began. Not resting on his laurels, he stepped up to again defend Poland, but this time against the Nazi powers. Once the Nazis began their occupation of Poland, the Polish military was dissolved. Many of its soldiers joined the Allies, but Pilecki wanted to do something different. He helped to found a new Polish military called the Secret Polish Army, which eventually was absorbed into the Polish government in exile's military, the Home Army. After becoming suspicious of Nazi messaging regarding the deaths of fellow Poles, he made the selfless decision to be captured and sent to Auschwitz so he could gather intelligence and start a resistance movement from within. He remained detained in the camp for 2.5 years under the prisoner number 4859, where he organized many prisoners to help him in this mission. This created a network of prisoners called the ZOW, who not only looked after each other, but secretly documented and distributed information to the Home Army, as well as transmitted messages using a homemade radio transmitter of the tragic life that was around them. After much hard labor, he was eventually able to get a relatively less laborious job at a bakery on the outskirts of the camp, beyond the infamous fenced-in portion of the camp, because of his connections to prisoner workers who handled some of the camp's administration. Along with a few other prisoners, he escaped into the night through the back door of the bakery after unbolting the door. This escape did not go unnoticed, as shots were fired at them from Nazi guards. Several bullets went through Pilecki's clothing, but only one directly hit him. Fortunately, he survived and continued his escape. Once back in safe Polish territory, after about a week of travel, he reported back to the Home Army, where he wrote of his experience. He recommended invading Auschwitz to his Polish counterparts, but his plans were never put into action. Additionally, documentation of this story was granted to Britain and the US, but they never took it seriously, considering it too outlandish. They also rejected his plans for liberating the camp, which will only grow more gruesome as time went on. Following the end of World War II, Pilecki continued his life's work of pushing against evil as he fought against the Soviets. It was not until the Soviet grip over Poland was released in 1989 that his story was able to be made widely public. At this point, he was no longer alive to see the recognition he earned for his risky endeavors. Years prior, he was arrested, tortured, and punished via a show trial by execution by the Soviets for his resistance towards them. His story is not only an incredible lesson in putting principles and personal sacrifice above all else. Pilecki can teach us that you do not need to be celebrated for your good deeds to take action. What is most important is the result of your actions, not the personal reward you receive for doing so. Many of the most heroic people throughout history are those whose name and story will never be known. Prior to going to the camp, Details surrounding Auschwitz were murky and limited. Due to this, there was no way Pilecki could have known what his fate would be. His ambitions could have easily been stopped before having a chance of getting started. This meaning that his act of heroism may never have reached the light of day, like so many others. Like some of those he arrived at the camp with, he could have been killed just moments after stepping foot into the camp's property. Immediately after arriving at Auschwitz, he discovered the reality of the horrors that he was to face. Yet he was determined to stay on track with the reason he was there. Even as his daily struggles continued, he did not seek to escape until he believed that his life was nearing an end. Knowing that his work would help bring an end to this Nazi atrocity, his dedication to his mission kept him inside the camp. There were times where he could have made an attempt to flee, but he, instead, abetted others in their own. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. This is the Agency of Influence.